What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some gaming predictions for 2023. The nice thing about the early part of the year is that honestly there's not a ton of things going on in terms of the video game industry, which is relevant when your job is reviewing games. So today I thought we'd do something a little more fun and talk about some theories I want to kind of throw at the wall for the next year, though I do want to preface this video by saying that these are just predictions formed on what is my own opinions. I don't know anything as far as concrete details go, and these are at best purely guesses. So with no further ado, let's dive into this with my first prediction here, and it's about Diablo 4. Frankly, I think this game is going to be average and lose everyone's interest after about a month or so. Now, I want to clarify here, I don't think the game is going to be bad, though I did do a video recently about reasons you should probably be a little apprehensive about it, but my prediction here is that the game is going to be fine to good and fall off everyone's radar shortly after, which has less to do with Diablo and more to do with the genre that it is in, which is ARPGs. Now, before everyone comes at me in the comments, I love ARPGs. There's plenty of videos where I talk about them and Diablo quite favorably. I love the Diablo series, actually, which is why I did that video about Diablo 4 recently. But ARPGs are games that tend to struggle with mass appeal, especially holding on to it for long periods of time. You can literally look at any ARPG, and this tends to be an issue. Even probably the biggest other name in that genre, Path of Exile, struggles to build numbers. They do a great job of player retention, especially with every league. They get a lot of returning players, but that's not a game that's exactly seeing a lot of growth. And with Diablo 4's focus on a more multiplayer experience with always online required, as well as other players in the zone, allowing you to group up, that kind of thing, I think there will be a dedicated fan base, just like there is with Path of Exile, but I think it's going to fall off really quick afterwards for most people, because while I love ARPGs, they are not games that do well long term in terms of growth as opposed to fan base retention. But at the end of the day, time will tell, and that brings us to our next prediction, and this is for Starfield. Starfield, I think, is going to be a very polarizing release, and that's my prediction for this one. It's going to be polarizing. You're going to have people that are in love with this game, and I think you're going to have a very prominent portion of the community that explains all the reasons it's not good. And that largely comes down to what they've shown so far. They've talked about the space exploration, which has you touching down on planets that we know aren't going to have anything on them. Despite being in space, it looks primarily like it's going to focus on humans and about possibly the discovery of alien races that are sentient. There will of course be alien fauna, but it is not sentient that we have seen thus far, which means it's going to be for the most part a more somewhat grounded exploration of space, which I think some people are going to love, especially combined with all its RPG elements, but I think a lot of other people are going to see what is traditional for RPG combat in that it is not as responsive and fun as, say, a more traditional first-person shooter in that regard, as well as the relatively empty feeling of space travel, and see those things as reasons that the game isn't for them. And combined with it being a new IP and thus no built-in fan base outside of the people who just enjoy Bethesda's games, this one's going to be polarizing. You're either going to love it or hate it. That's my prediction for this one. But that brings us to our number 3 prediction, and this is for another Bethesda IP, and it is Fallout. I'm predicting we're going to hear something about the next Fallout one way or the other this year, and that is largely because, as it stands, Microsoft owns the IP by owning Bethesda, and simply put, I don't think they're going to let this IP sit on ice for almost 10 years before we see another release, from now, I mean. Because with Starfield launching this year, we already know that Bethesda Game Studios is going to start working on Elder Scrolls 6, which is going to take conservatively 4 or 5 years to come out, and that's when they would conceivably start working on another Fallout title, which would put a release for that around 2030, 2032, somewhere in that range. And quite frankly, I just don't see Microsoft letting an IP that big sit for that long. And there's rumors swirling all over the place about this, but my own personal thoughts on this is that Microsoft is probably behind the scenes figuring out how they're going to do this, because the other obvious person to do it is the other studio they own, Obsidian, who has worked on Fallout previously with New Vegas. But if you look at Obsidian's schedule, they're pretty packed. They've got Avowed going on right now, The Outer Worlds 2, which are both likely to be very large projects for them. They don't exactly have the resources to dedicate to a full-blown Fallout title, which means Microsoft is likely behind the scenes figuring this stuff out. And off the top of my head, once Obsidian clears their schedule, I think that's the most likely candidate. But one way or another, I bet we hear something in this regard sooner or later, because it just does not make financial sense to let that IP sit and wait for Bethesda Game Studios to finish up what they're doing. And while I think they will absolutely be involved in the development, it's likely going to be a team effort so they can advise, if you will, while they work on their own stuff, which has been in the works for quite some time. And then from there, we are moving right along to Baldur's Gate 3, Larian's latest and greatest title, set to launch sometime in August of this year. And my prediction here is that the last part of the game is going to be significantly less polished and probably need a lot of work. However, I think no one's going to care and the game is still going to do very well. For a variety of reasons I feel this way, but primarily because this is an incredibly large CRPG that thus requires a lot of testing, but we've only seen the first act in the early access period, which means it's not getting a lot of public testing, which is often needed to make CRPGs great in the end. And while they are obviously doing internal testing, I think it simply does not compare to having millions of people test what you're doing. So I think once it launches and people get to the end game, they're going to find a lot of problems that weren't caught in QA, which is when it will finally start to get fixed, which is exactly what has happened with the last couple of Larian Studios games. Now, while you might say that, well, they know it's a problem, so they'll address it, Larian Studios has exploded in size over the course of BG3's development, and more moving parts tends to mean more potential problems. So I'm guessing the back half of that game's gonna be in, at the very least, a rough place in comparison to the rest of it. But as I mentioned, I don't think anybody's gonna care about this. I think it's gonna be exactly what happened with Original Sin 2, where the front-loaded part of the game is so polished and well done, and so full of content that most people don't get to the back half of the game to see the rough parts of it, and thus it doesn't factor into their opinions about it, which means they aren't going to care. So while I don't think it's going to affect the game that much, I do think the back part of BG3 is likely going to be in a rough place at launch. And last but not least, I thought we'd leave it off with a fun one, and that is my prediction for Game of the Year 2023. Sometime probably this December, if all goes well, we can look back at this video and maybe have a laugh about it. But looking at the current lineup and how things stand, I'm betting Game of the Year is going to be Hogwarts Legacy. Controversies and all. Now, this is based on one simple fact. Go Google the Game of the Year award winners for basically its inception. There's one or two outliers, and the rest of them are all very much so a similar kind of game. And when you look at it from that perspective, Hogwarts Legacy almost looks as if it's been tailor-made to appeal to that award. And when you're talking about a show like the Game Awards, controversy stirs viewership. It doesn't actually matter if you agree or not. The fact is you watched it, you gave them your viewership, and thus they got paid. So with that in mind, I think Hogwarts Legacy, currently speaking, has the strongest potential for that win. Now, that said though, games come out of left field all the time. I think there is a lot of potential in the lineup for 2023, and my personal Game of the Year will likely either be Baldur's Gate 3 or Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader, provided it releases. No official release date window on that one, but having played through the alpha, I've enjoyed it quite a bit. But if that doesn't release this year, then BG3 is the likely one, because those two are kind of more up my alley than everything else releasing this year, and tend to be where my personal interests lie. There you guys go. What are hopefully some fun predictions that we might see in 2023. I'd love to see what you guys predict in terms of the video game industry down below. And I think come December, this will be a fun video to look back on and laugh at either how hilariously wrong I got it or what turned out to possibly be true. Either way though, I'm looking forward to whatever this year holds in terms of gaming, because at a glance, it's looking like it's going to be a big one. So with all of that said, truly, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless, thank you. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.